Well, hey guys, and welcome back to Maine Fish and Wildlife for a little more remote learning. We're getting into that time of year now with snow on the ground that it becomes pretty awesome to take a walk in the woods and start to piece together some of the stories being told by animal tracks out there in the woods. And one of my favorite things to do this time of year is get out and walk around and do some track ID and check out what kind of creatures have been running around in the TA forest and all over the state. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about winter track ID, and hopefully at some point, for those of you who are in here in person, depending on your day in the near future, we'll get out there into the woods and walk around and try to put some of these skills to work. So stick with me today. We'll have a little assignment to do at the end, and we'll start to introduce some of the strategies we use when doing some winter tracking. So right off the bat, when I find tracks in the Maine woods, the very first thing that goes through my mind as I start to think about identifying those tracks would be size. And I can whittle down, to pretty close to whatever I'm looking at just by their general size, right? We can cross off a lot of little tiny creatures or a lot of big giant creatures depending on how big the tracks are. But maybe as important as size is that this idea down there at the bottom of gait pattern, right? And by gait, that term gait is referencing the style in which a creature walks, okay? Even people have their own gait, and I always share with my students, as a lacrosse coach, I coached lacrosse for years, and my guys were all wearing identical uniforms and helmets and pads, and people sometimes would say, how can you tell which kids are which? And it honestly, over time, you end up learning students or players by their gait, right? The way they run, the way they move, you can quickly tell, oh, that's so-and-so over there. And they all just have like their own unique gait. The other thing that always comes to mind when I discuss gait pattern with students is I'll never forget, one time in college, my parents were coming to visit, and I was hanging out with a new college buddy I had made, and on the lawn in front of our dorm. And I knew my parents would be there at some point that day, but I hadn't really spoken to him. And this is a guy that I had met at college, had never met my parents before, and he looked up way across the way, like a couple hundred yards away, and he said, "Hey, is that your dad?" And I look over, and I was like, "Yes, that is. How did you know that?" And he goes, "Oh, that guy walks exactly like you." And I will never forget that, because I realized that my dad and I have the exact same gait pattern, right? We walk in an identical fashion, and then it made me all self-conscious because I'm like, do I have a weird gait? Do I walk in a unique enough way that, I'm identifiable at a great distance? Like, it really, really blew my mind. But it's totally true. Everybody has their own gait, and those are very microscopic differences between people, but in animals, there are a wide array of different gait patterns, and depending on your gait can really affect the way that you leave tracks in the snow. So very quickly, if I go, okay, I've got a big track here, the next thing I think about is the gait pattern, and then I can really narrow it down to just a couple of species before I ever think about the shape of the track. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, different gait patterns and how we organize creatures by their gait. And we're going to look at diagonal gait, pacers, bounders, and gallopers. Some of my favorites are the gallopers. So let's jump right in here. We'll talk about each of these. We'll talk about some examples of them. This video is going to be very helpful for you later on when you do your assignment. So I strongly suggest you come back, use this video to flip through and go back to certain slides, whatever you need to see as you work on your assignment. So let's jump right in and let's talk about diagonal gait. Okay, these are creatures who walk in a fashion where their tracks end up in kind of almost, and I can draw it here too, their tracks end up kind of like this. If I was going to draw, them walking, you'd have this kind of diagonal track pattern like this, right? And one of the interesting thing is, how could a creature with 4 feet leave such a almost perfectly straight line of tracks like the ones we see in the snow there in the picture on this slide? And what we're looking at there are red fox tracks, and this is pretty awesome. Foxes and coyotes especially, all of our wild canids, they're all diagonal walkers, and they have over millions of years evolved, I mean, some amazing adaptations for energy conservation, one of which being this strategy we call direct register. So what happens with a fox or a coyote or a deer even is that these creatures, as they walk along, their hind foot lands exactly where their front foot on the same side just did. And that is huge energy savings in deep snow. When you think about it, you're not busting through the snow 2 different times. We all do that instinctively. If you're walking behind a friend in the snow, deep snow this time of year, what do? You immediately start cherry picking their tracks, right? And you step right where they've just stepped, and it's a big energy savings. And these creatures have evolved to this over millions of years. They don't even think about it, right? It's just part of their gait. Their hind foot lands perfectly where their front foot just was. And when we're in class together, we'll watch little video clips of these creatures walking. And when you start to look at the direct register, it's really mind-boggling how instinctively they're able to walk in that perfectly efficient manner. And that's one of the big differences to me when I see like fox and coyote tracks in the snow compared to, your average house dog, which is not at all worried about energy efficiency and it's essentially been bred out of them. They're getting a bowl of kibble no matter what. Their direct register has gotten really sloppy in most breeds, and their efficiency of gait has gone way, way down because that's not something they've been bred for, right? They've been bred for a variety of things, but efficiency of gait, not one of them in most breeds, okay? That hind foot is going to land right in that front foot print, and there's a pretty good example of some diagonal gait in action there. Let's see if I can... we can flip to the next page here. So some diagonal walkers to know. Some years we would have a quiz on this. I don't think we will this year, but here are some examples you could choose from for your assignment today. In Maine, we have white-tailed deer, moose, coyotes and red fox. Gray fox also come to mind as classic diagonal walkers. Those are kind of the most common ones we're going to find out there in the forests of Maine that are going to show that diagonal track pattern. So maybe pick one of those 4 for your assignment today and do a quick little track profile. You'll see what I mean here a little later on. So there's your diagonal walkers, almost a straight line of tracks, sometimes a little more diagonal, left to right. But you can see all of them are exhibiting direct register. The moose and deer not quite as cleanly as the coyote and the red fox there. Skipping ahead, let's talk about pacers. And these ones are kind of neat in that they're not nearly as efficient looking in their track patterns as a diagonal walker. They have almost that diagonal pattern, as again you could see with these tracks in the snow here. You can see, if we draw a line between them, kind of diagonal in shape. But if you look, we have a front paw with a hind paw that landed in front of it. Front paw, hind paw, right? Front paw, hind paw. And if we look at that pattern, that is classic of a pacer, okay? That's not quite as efficient as direct register, and the hind foot is landing just ahead of that front foot, but still in a diagonal pattern, and we call that a pacing style of walk. And we see that with a few different species in Maine. And if we skip ahead here, let me skip ahead to the next slide, we would see things like black bears are classic pacers, and porcupines and raccoons, all good examples of pacers. And these are creatures with a slightly less efficient walk. If you just imagine, in your mind, a bear or a porcupine walking along. Have you ever seen a porcupine or a raccoon walk? They have kind of this almost side-to-side waddle that they do that's very typical of a pacer. So there you go. There are our pacers that we're going to be looking for in the woods out there this year. Jumping ahead here, we're going a little quick, but those are 3 great ones to choose from on your assignment a little later. Easy ones to find information on. Oh, some of my favorite creatures in the Maine woods are bounders. And bounders are really neat in that they run along, they exhibit direct register. Okay, so their hind feet are actually landing exactly where their front feet landed. And if I draw their track pattern here, if we drew some basic tracks, we can see that their tracks come in sets of 2. Boom, boom, boom. And they come in pairs like that. And they're actually exhibiting direct register. It's hard to tell there, but what's going on is these creatures are running where their 2 front feet hit the snow, and then as they lurch forward, their 2 hind feet land exactly where their 2 front feet just were. And their tracks come in these perfect little pairs next to each other like that. They're bounding along, as we would say. And this is classic of most weasels. okay? Most of our mustelids in the Maine woods, our fisher, our otter, our American marten, our mink, which one am I missing? Mink, fisher, otter, marten. Oh, and both of our weasels, the ermine, the long and short-tailed weasel, those guys are all bounders. And when we find their tracks in the snow, depending on size, we can kind of narrow it down to which of those mustelids we've seen. So what we're thinking about with weasels is that they are bounders. And I get excited every time I find a set of bounder tracks in the woods because I know I found some sort of cool little predatory weasel running through the woods. And I did find fisher tracks in the TA forest 3 or 4 years ago on some fresh snow. So they're around, and these are some of the most exciting, I think, cool tracks to find. So if we skip ahead here to some examples you could choose from on your assignment today. Just a pair of weasels here. The fisher or the mink would be great examples of each. You can see the difference in size. The pattern is almost identical, that 2 by 2 by 2 track pattern, where the fisher paw, though, is 2.5 inches long, and the mink track is only 1.5 inches. So much larger feet on the fisher. It's a much larger weasel. So there you go. There's your bounders. You could choose from either of those or do a different weasel if you want. And finally, we have the Gallopers, okay? And these guys are really funny ones. They exhibit a galloping track pattern. And by that we mean that their hind feet actually land, if these are their hind feet land just ahead of their front feet as they bound along. And it's hard to imagine that the hind foot tracks are actually ahead of those front foot tracks. So this would be an example of some snowshoe hare tracks actually traveling that way. And I can't tell you how long it took me to figure this out as a kid, as a kid rabbit hunting. I was constantly confused by snowshoe hare tracks because I knew their hind feet were way bigger than their front feet. So when I saw their tracks in the snow, instinctively I knew the big tracks are their back feet. And I thought, okay, they must be going this way because their back feet are, in the back. And over again, the old timers that had taken me rabbit hunting would say, no, that rabbit was heading, this way. And that took a long time to get used to, that they're a galloper and that their front feet actually land first and their hind feet slap on the ground up ahead of them as they run along. And this is super common in rodents as well as members of that order Leporidae, or the family Leporidae, the rabbits, right? Snowshoe hare, New England cottontail, and all of our rodents. Mouse tracks are very common in the snow this time of year, and you'll see that they're perfect little gallopers as they run along. And the other classic one that we see all the time in suburbia around here in Saco and Dayton and Arundel is the gray squirrel. The gray squirrel is a classic galloper, okay? Their tracks look just like snowshoe hare tracks, just a little bit smaller. That snowshoe hare can have a hind foot up to 6 inches long. The hind track can be up to 6 inches long. It's usually a little smaller than that. But they're a perfect galloper, and both of these creatures are traveling, in this direction. So that's important to realize that these guys are gallopers, and they are, their front feet are going to land first, and then their hind feet are going to land together up in front as they gallop along. And just a really neat example of a kind of crazy gait pattern that ends up working out pretty well for these creatures. So that's the 4 different styles of gait that I really want you guys to know. And I think this video will end up being very helpful for you. The other resource that I have for you that I'm going to post to our assignment today is this document that was put out by Inland Fisheries and Wildlife a while back now. But it has all kinds of different tracks on it. And we can see, as I look through here, I can quickly say, okay, look, Canada lynx, classic diagonal pattern. We didn't talk about that one. Our weasels, our long and short-tailed weasel, are perfect bounders with those 2 by 2 tracks. Okay, I can look around. Oh, a woodchuck. We didn't talk about woodchucks. The woodchuck's a pacer. I can tell it's a pacer by those pairs of tracks. Woodchucks would be one that we almost never see in the snow, tracks in the snow, because they're a hibernator, and they are asleep this time of year. They're not out in the snow much. Cottontail rabbit, we kind of mentioned, but perfect example of a bounder. there. So all the you'll notice the gait pattern is shown with all of these sets of tracks, and that's important because that's a huge part of identifying creatures. So I love this document. It's kind of neat because not only does it show the shape of the track, which we often get hung up on, it also shows that gait pattern, which might be the most important thing to me as I look at tracks. So you can use that document. I really hope that you use this video as you work along on your assignment today, which is going to be found in Notability, or it's going to be found in Google Classroom. Upload that to Notability, and you're going to pick one example of each of these creatures, right? Let's imagine we were doing, a common, a species, a diagonal walker. Maybe you could do red fox. I don't know. It's up to you. Pick anything that needs to be a diagonal walker, though. And you can use my video to figure out examples. Give me an image of that creature. Draw your basic track pattern on your own. And you don't have to actually draw the tracks. I'm looking for the pattern. Like this is a pretty good example of a track pattern of a diagonal walker, right? It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be an amazing artist to get full credit here. And then finally, do a quick image search on Google and find an image of some actual red fox tracks in the snow, or whichever diagonal walker you choose. So that should not take you long. You're going to do one of each of these styles of gait. So pick a pacer, pick maybe a black bear or a porcupine or a raccoon or a skunk, any of these pacers, and do a little bit of research to fill that in. A bounder, pick a weasel, one of the mustelids in the Maine woods. And then finally a galloper, one of these rodents or rabbits, and do a little mini profile on that. So this should not take you super long. You've got all the resources you need. I hope you'll use this video to your advantage because there's a lot of help in here as well. And I look forward to getting together with you guys in person at some point and getting out into the woods looking for tracks. And thanks a bunch for tuning in today, and I will see you guys next time.